everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. With all of the lore and inside jokes of the Phish universe, conspiracy theories are part and parcel of being a superfan. When we learn the lyrics to new songs, see the artwork of announcing a new tour, or even an offhand comment from a band member on PhishRadio, Phish fans are always looking for signs and asking, what does it all mean? Today's guest, James Dell, is the perfect fan to answer that question. James works closely with people in the creative sector, and he chose one of Phish's most creative, if inscrutable, performances to discuss today. The SciFi Soldier, or Get More Down set from October 31st, 2021 at the MGM Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Phish Halloween sets are always fun and always generate controversy, but there was so much to the SciFi Soldier set that it almost transcended the idea of a Halloween costume set. The songs were practiced, but the vocals sounded spontaneous. Instead of a Phishbill, there was a comic book. There were themed shows leading up to the 31st that may or may not have connected to Halloween night. And that is to say nothing of the poor ventilation and aftermath of COVID from that run that ended the fall 2021 tour. All of that is to say that James and I had plenty to talk about even when dissecting just one set of a 3-set show. While I was fairly passé about the SciFi Soldier set, James was seeing entire worlds in these songs. Not a line went by that James didn't ascribe a deeper meaning to it and a grander sense of scope to the wider Phish experience. I can honestly say that after this conversation, I will never listen to this set the same way again. So let's join James to talk about Passion Fruit, Gamehenge, and the Phish Codex as we discuss set 2 of October 31st, 2021 in Las Vegas, Nevada. James, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, sir. How are you?
I'm doing very well. We are entering the spring in New York City, and today it happens to be in the mid-60s, which is a nice change of pace. So looking forward to the spring. Baseball is starting soon. And then, of course, Phish Summer Tour, the Sphere. We got a lot coming up. By the time this airs, it'll all be in the past, but looking forward to it in the moment. But today we are here to discuss a number of things, but specifically the SciFi Soldier set, or Get More Down, depending on who you talk to, what it's called, that took place on October 31st, 2021 at the MGM Grand Theater in Las Vegas. And this is a show and a situation, a period in Phish history that is surrounded by controversy, one might say, split opinions for sure, excitement, joy, and hesitance, I would say. All those things rolled into one that kind of came to a head at this show and this run, and specifically this set. But before we get into Phish, James, you are probably best known to listeners of this podcast as being a co-host of another podcast. You co-hosted We've Got a Band, which is part of the Undermine series. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, Osiris Media, RJB, and Tom Marshall, they were the ones who, my co-host and I, Gabby, we pitched the show to them right after the April 21 shows, actually. April 21? Those shows in MSG, right? That was 21?
Yep.
Yeah, we pitched it to them. Right? Gabby came up with the idea, actually, right after during those shows, actually. We first started talking about it. And a couple months later, we talked to Osiris, and they said we had a couple open weeks on Undermine that they were trying to fill, and we had an idea that they loved, so we did it.
For anyone who hasn't listened to it, what was that idea? Give us the elevator pitch of We've Got a Band.
This is not news to anyone who loves the band Phish, obviously, but the fan base is so varied and so successful in their own right that there are a lot of creative people who exist kind of in the public sphere who actually are big Phish fans, but unless you're really in this community or seeing some of these people at those shows, you wouldn't necessarily know it about them, right? They might signal it once in a while in their, news broadcasts or on their reality shows or whatever. We really wanted to spend some time with those people who had their own kind of creative or, I don't want to say it's like celebrities only because there's various degrees of celebrity on that show, but we really wanted to talk to these successful creatives who were listening to Phish and really get their stories about, what about this band gave them both, inspiration, but also, some tangible steps as to like how to exist as a creative person in the world when you're making something that no one fully gets yet, right? Like that is the Phish story in a nutshell. And there are so many people out there who love Phish whose own careers have kind of mirrored that. And we wanted to talk to those people and kind of get a feel for the why and the what and the how. And really more than anything, like I kind of wanted to do it to draw in more fans. So, you might be a fan of one of these people, but might not fully understand what it is that they are a fan of. And so, Bravo, for example, we had Austin Kroll from the show's called Southern Charm on We've Got a Band. And Bravo has an entire, it doesn't belong to Bravo, but there is an entire Facebook page that exists of Phish fans who also love Bravo. And so like, that's a whole sub community of, there's thousands of people who love Bravo reality and they love Phish. And so being able to give them an episode with Austin Kroll about the thing that they love most about that character or that personality, I think was kind of the idea. We made 8 episodes. It was a great time. I don't know that we'll make more anytime soon, but it was a really fun project and we had some really amazing conversations.
Did you notice any common threads or any topics that came up over and over again from your interviewees?
There were. I think this idea of like collective effervescence, which is something that Gabby always talked a lot about. When you go to a Phish show, I hate when people, try to make it more than what it is and say, it's a religious experience, it's spiritual or whatever. But there is something that happens to you at a Phish show if you do it right, where your brain kind of turns off and you're just kind of in a moment. If anyone meditates, it's the same kind of neurological, I think, process that your brain goes through where you're not thinking, but you're not thinking. It's kind of that line between, it's that space between me and my mind of, nothingness and everything. I think a lot of the people we spoke to really both appreciated that this is a place that they can go to get that. And so that's I think a really being able to kind of separate yourself from your thoughts and kind of go into a flow state the way that the band does, I think is really critical for any creative person to kind of know that that's a flip that switches and you can learn how to flip it. Another thing that came up a lot was, we asked a lot of them like what it's like to be semi-famous or even really famous and go to a Phish show. And, that's just a personal curiosity, right? Like I like going to Phish mostly as an anonymous person. And, people know me a little bit from the podcast or, previous work that I've done in media or whatever, but not really a known entity. And being able to go to a Phish show and be anonymous is a feature, not a bug for me, right? Like I get to just go and hang out with my friends and let loose, and I don't have to put out an image or worry about what anyone thinks of me. I think one of my biggest questions going into the podcast was, how do you navigate that as a known entity, right? Like if people know who you are and you walk into a place like that, can you still allow yourself to let go and release and have the kind of loosey-goosey time that I get to enjoy when I go? And the answer we got roundly was yes. I don't think anyone said that it was really a problem for them. Some of them really liked it. It was cool getting recognized and, snapping a photo with someone. Some became popular kind of after the fact, right? So they've been in the Phish, they existed in Phish world so long and so, solidly before they became known entities beyond the Phish world, that like this still feels like their home community. It's a really special thing. I don't know that if you went to go see a show like U2 or something and you're a known celebrity, that people would leave you alone the same way that people can leave you alone at a Phish show. And it's not that everyone leaves them alone, but there is a certain level of respect and kind of, Phish fans seem to understand that like you're not here as Chris Witowski from The Bear, you're here as Chris the Phish fan. And so, say hi, but don't spend too much time, harshing someone else's vibe.
And James, you and I have spent a lot of time together at shows. We've seen not a small number of shows together. And I know that I can trust you when it comes to something really nerdy or relatively insignificant when Phish does something or changes a lyric or teases another song, that you're the guy I could turn to and say, did you hear that? Like nudge you a little bit. Was there anything that you learned about Phish that you didn't know before you co-hosted and produced the podcast? Of course, I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
I have to ask this question.
My mother is a teacher too for 30 years, so I'm very used to those kinds of probing, like, tell me why though. We'll talk about this a little later when we get to my Phish career, I'm sure, but I got to the party a little bit late just by virtue of when the band was broken up and when I was making it to college, and I kind of just missed that window of time that I could have been on tour in college, but instead the band was broken up and I was not listening to them during those years. And so, the 90s 1.0, that whole kind of era was a mystery. Not a mystery. I have friends, many, many friends. I mean, one of my closest Phish friends, Lockhart Steele, wrote the Farmer's Almanac back in the day, right? And so he didn't take me to one of my first shows. His friend Meredith took me to one of my first shows. And so I had been around a lot of 1.0ers. Almost all of my Phish friends that I go to shows with are from that era. So I get anecdotes and I hear stories about the old days, but a lot of the people we spoke to have been on board for a long time. And so they had some really wonderful stories about, the early days, like Aaron Ralston, who, the hiker who that movie was based off of, where the guy chops his arm off. I think it's 25 hours.
127 hours.
Thank you. 127. So we interviewed him, and he was there in Europe with them, and he was hanging out after the shows with them in Europe, because that's how many fans made it to Europe and actually did. It's like understanding just where this all came from. I tapped in around 2008, and so to get an idea of where everything was coming from and to really hear the stories from 1.0 from people who were there really kind of contextualize just why the people from 1992 are still coming, right? I know why I'm still coming, but I've only been doing this for 15 years, more or less.
Yeah, only.
It's oh yeah, exactly. And I'm at, nearly 100 shows at this point myself, but I get now so much clearer what was happening in 1997 and 1993 and 94 that like really started to solidify what made this band so special for so many years.
Well, you've brought up talking about creative people, and you obviously yourself are very interested in that range of the human mind about what makes someone creative, what drives them, what are their motives and such. But you yourself are a creative person. You have a Substack called Down the Pipes. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where people can find it?
Yeah, you could find it at downthepipes.co. That's .com without the M. It is a reference to Phish. It's a lesser deep, but still not entirely obvious Reba lyric if you hadn't figured it out. But it's not just about Phish. In fact, it's seldom about Phish, although I think a lot of the, again, I hate to take it to a religious or spiritual place this early in the conversation. However, there is a kind of zen of Phish that I have kind of tapped into and started understanding that has a lot to do with mindfulness. It has a lot to do with kind of balance and releasing your mind, clear your mind, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. That kind of aura of Phish. You don't need to be into Phish to be into what Phish is out there kind of proselytizing. I feel like we're going way into the religious territory with that word.
Well, no, I don't see it as religious. I see it as more as what health food stores would sell as organic in a way. What I mean by that is because I read a bunch of your entries on Down the Pipes where there's a range of topics. You talk about weight loss, you talk about circadian rhythms or body rhythms and insomnia. There's one where you just kind of go off on what TV you've been watching lately. So it's kind of all inclusive. To be honest, religion was very far from my mind, no matter what adjectives you used to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I do write about religion in there too. I'm fairly anti-organized religion, though I am very pro-human betterment and, kind of treating yourself like the star that you are, I think is something that Phish like Phish, right? Like there are religious undertones and overtones in some of their songs that, if you're listening for them and you want to see them, they're there. You could definitely, some are more obvious than others, but they're in there. They're littered throughout the entire catalog of what they're writing about, going, from mythology to, more kind of like the big religion type stuff. But at the end of the day, it really is not about the religion or the spirituality even. It is about, the betterment of self, I think. And that's, I think, what religion always kind of set out to do, was to kind of give people a way to live their life better.
And that lasted about 9 seconds.
Well, exactly. And then, they started using it as an excuse to, commit atrocities and repress people and minorities and women and all kinds of things. And so I reject all of that. But in rejecting that, I think you need to replace that, God-sized hole with something. And I do think that, music is a really powerful connective tissue that then can help you find what that means for you. And what it means for you may mean something very different than what it means to me. But, Down the Pipes was really started. I was running a website called Futurism before that, and I had sold that website, didn't make a ton of money, but enough that I could kind of reflect and sit back and focus on my own writing for the first time in my career. And that's what came out. It was a lot of this real amalgam of, everything from here's how I'm losing weight to here's a primer to Phish, if you've never heard of it before, to, here's why I think organized religion was hoisted upon us by scared men. There's a way to, counteract that by creating your own sense of spiritual grounding that doesn't necessarily have to relate to a church, But yeah, I think Down the Pipes was a really kind of, it came out around the same time that I was doing the podcast. And so Phish was very much the focus of my life at that time. I went to, more shows that year than any, 20 plus shows that year. I'd never done that before. And, it spurred me into what I'm doing now professionally, which is, running a newsletter called Passion Fruit, which you can go subscribe to on passionfruit.it. So it's the word passion fruit with a dot between the U and the IT.
And I'll put a link to it in today's show notes. It'll be there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's it's a newsletter. It comes out twice a week. We also have a bunch of journalists on a website, writing daily blogs. But the focus there is more of this, which is helping creative people find a way to do creativity sustainably. So don't let it run you down, how to make enough money so that you can keep doing it and keep making more. And the internet has been an amazing thing that has allowed anyone to kind of become a broadcaster, a creator, a writer, whatever. I mean, here we are.
You're talking to one, yeah.
Yeah, but and that's a fucking awesome thing. As a kid growing up, like, I thought media was awesome, and now anyone can do it. But it's hard business if you don't set it up right, if you don't find ways to monetize it, if you don't take care of yourself and like really give yourself the space to create. People who are creative need that kind of support, need to know that there are other people going through that. And so we started Passion Fruit really as a way to connect those people, give them, tangible tips, tangible news, kind of in the quote unquote creator economy. And then, between you, me, and our listeners here, I think creative labor is kind of due for an organizing reckoning of sorts. I think the platforms have way too much power. While I certainly don't want to be the organizing force, I would like people with creative skills who make their money doing creative things to really understand the value of their labor. And if I'm not going to be the one to organize them, then I hope they find a way to organize themselves at some point.
Well, I could tell already we could go on about this for a very long time. I have thoughts, but this may not be the best conversation for it. But let's go back to Phish and pivot there with the attendance bias lightning round.
Attendance bias lightning round.
So, James, you mentioned that you are I don't want to say recent fan because 15 years is 15 years for anybody. But when was your first Phish show, and what do you remember about it?
So my first Phish show was their first show back at Madison Square Garden in December of 2008. I believe it was in 2008.
It was
Might have been
2009. It was December 2nd.
2009, December 2nd, 2009 then. And it was, like I mentioned earlier, I was not really a Phish fan. I was a music fan. I had not really spent much time with Phish. I knew Phish from the 90s as a ice cream flavor that I absolutely adored. I remember in fifth grade, eating Phish food and watching, TV in the summer. That was truly my first exposure. So, on Long Island, it was Taking Back Sunday and Weezer and The Used and Something Corporate. And like, that was really the music that I grew up with, but I loved it. And I went all the time. And in my house growing up, I had a lot of prog rock. So I was primed for Phish, but it wasn't until 2009 that some coworkers, Meredith and her friend Locke and the whole crew that I still go to shows with, had an extra ticket. They said, you like music, you're going to like this thing. I remember going into the show being skeptical, really wanting to kind of roll my eyes at it, as I think a lot of people do in their first kind of, phases of it. And I had a great time. I remembered thinking to myself at the time, I get it. I see why people do this. I don't know that I am someone that will do this again, but like, I get it. I enjoyed it. I see what's happening here. Lo and behold, I did not get it. I did not see what was happening there fully, but like, I got a taste enough of it that whenever that group would invite me back to shows over the kind of subsequent years, Jones Beach, another show at the Garden here or there, I would kind of tap in for, one or two shows out of a run and just kind of, get my fill, hang out with my friends. But it wasn't until a Halloween show, the David Bowie show, that I really was like, oh, fuck, I'm in now. I'm locked.
Well, what was your most recent show? What did you think about it?
It was New Year's at the Garden. And I think it may have, forever altered how I look at that band and what I think that band is capable of doing for its fan base. That might sound hyperbolic, but I really don't think it is. It felt like the most fan service that a band could ever offer to a group of fans that have wanted nothing but that for a long time. We'll talk about this, but I do think that this was kind of foreshadowed all the way back in SciFi Soldier in terms of just kind of laying the groundwork for something big and spectacular for the fan base in their 40th year and, beyond, really. That it's not rare for a band to play its hits for its fans. But I think what Phish has managed to do with its own mythology and with its own lore has created such a built-up need to see what we got to see at the Garden on New Year's Eve this year. A word that came up during my podcast a lot was catharsis. This sense of, release that comes from emotional kind of
tension.
Yeah, it's that tension that finally gets released in some form. And I think it was the most cathartic show I've ever been to. I mean, everyone around me was weeping, except the girl.
I was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, we were a mess, and in the most beautiful way. And I don't know any other band that can evoke that many people to have that big of an emotional reaction to something so simple, but it was so special. It almost is, I won't say it ruined Phish for me, but like a joke that was kind of going, I forget who said it in our section, but someone kind of said, I feel like I just won Phish, like I beat Phish the game by saying this. And there is a certain sense that like I've now climbed the mountain and, where do you go from the top but down? But I don't feel that way. I really do think in terms of knowing that the band can deliver delight time and time again in different formats and with songs I've never heard before and songs I've heard a million times now, that's the important thing. It's not that they played Gamehenge. It's that they knew that this was what we needed this year. And they've continued delivering what we need to hear every year prior and every year since. And that's such a special thing to be a part of.
It was. But going different holidays from New Year's Eve, we're here to talk about a Halloween show today, or at least a Halloween set. Next question up on the lightning round. Other than the SciFi Soldier one, I don't even know if that was your favorite, but that one excluded, what has been your favorite Phish Halloween show?
I've seen a good chunk of Phish Halloween. I was not there for, what was it, 2014 or 20? I didn't see the wingsuit set.
That was 2013.
I didn't see that. I didn't see the haunted house one. It was really that David Bowie show. I do believe it was in 2016. I had been living in Vegas for a year. I hated living in Vegas. I had my media company that I worked for previously, Gawker, had shut down because of a lawsuit from Hulk Hogan. I was fairly depressed and, really looking. I wanted to get back into media. I wanted to get back to New York, but I felt stuck in Vegas. And so the day of Halloween, or no, I'm sorry, the day before, it was the start of the run. It was, I think, the Friday night or the Thursday night. I resigned from my job. And I had all my first show friends were staying at the MGM. They had a nice big suite that they were all hanging out in. I literally handed in my resignation letter, got in my car, drove straight to the MGM, and then spent the whole weekend with my friends going to Phish. And it was really the first time I had done a full multi-night run that felt like a lot by the end, where I was exhausted and I, couldn't even think straight, but that was really special. And it was made more special. I won't blow up his spot, but a friend of a friend had mentioned to a friend of mine that he knew what it was going to be. He knew it was going to be David Bowie. And so I had been working at Marquee Group, or Tao Group is what we were calling them at the time, the nightclub group in Vegas. And we had a face painter on staff there. And so I went to the face painter because it was Halloween night. And so, they were face painting the guests and the staff. And so I went in before the Halloween show knowing it was going to be David Bowie something. And I had him paint, the star on my face. And I kind of had a David Bowie jacket that a friend had given me. And so not only was it a great weekend and the first time I had ever done a full run, but it was the time that I had kind of first called it by showing up in costume with what the band was going to do. And there was something special about that. I had the inside information, but there's something really cool about feeling like you see what they're doing. You're on the same level as they are. And that was really the first time I had ever felt that.
Yeah, that happens so rarely. Even calling the opener is a shot in the dark. So got to take advantage of it when you have it. Finally, to wrap up this lightning round, James, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
This question plagued me, man. I rifled through so many things, and there were things that are normal that I think feel more weird at a Phish show, because Phish shows are just generally weird places, and so normal almost sticks out. The two stories that stick out to me though are a guy came up to me and asked me to buy him a beer. And I asked if he was underage. He clearly wasn't. He was older than me. And he said no, he just didn't believe in any kind of cards or plastic in his wallet. And it was one of those venues that only had, credit card machines. And so he gave me $20 to put a beer on his card. That was kind of weird. And then, of course, he started telling me why he doesn't believe in plastic. And that's a theme from the bottom that I will never get back.
Yeah.
But the weirdest thing I've ever seen at a Phish show, and one of the things that I still laugh out when I think about it, was at Atlantic City. I forget if it was the first or second. They did those 2 years in a row, most recently at Atlantic City. And at one of them or both of them, I can't recall, there were billboards for nitrous tank deliveries on the boardwalk, clear as day, over the show. And I have never since or before seen anything like that advertised on a billboard. And so being in Atlantic City, which is already kind of a dingy place to begin with, and seeing tank advertisements the size of a billboard, I was truly like, oh, we are in our place. We're with our people.
When was this show played?
So thinking back, 2021 was an odd year to be a Phish fan, and it was just an odd year to be a human. I think we were kind of dipping our toes in the water to be, are things back to normal? I remember at school, we had all these, as my grandma would say, fakakta policies of wearing masks sometimes, but not in other times, right? I have about 100 students. 50 would show up Monday, Wednesday. The other 50 would show up Tuesday, Thursday, and they would alternate Fridays. I mean, looking back at it, it was just a wacky year. 2021, like I was just saying, was kind of when our world began to test the waters, and Phish was kind of a microcosm of that. Is it yes? Is it no? Should we not? The summer tour seemed to go off without a hitch. I only went to Atlantic City, back to your story of the weirdest thing you've ever seen. But the fall tour was another matter because I didn't hear of many people on my kind of anecdotal Phish social media posts. During the summer, it seemed to be very clear, very clean. Everyone was happy. The band sounded good. But the fall tour was another matter because many of the shows were at indoor venues, and the number of positive COVID cases, both within Phish and without Phish, nationally, the COVID cases just exploded, which is also part of the postscript of this Las Vegas run, where people were heavily criticizing the ventilation system or the lack thereof at the MGM Grand Arena. Speaking of which, today's show, Halloween 2021, was the last of 4 nights at the MGM that concluded a 13-show fall tour. Leading up to the Halloween night, the band played, in quotes, the Numbers Show on October 28th, with the set list composed almost entirely of songs that have numbers in the title. And they ended up totaling the soon-to-be significant also in quotes, the significant sum of 4680. They played a normal show, set list-wise, but full of killer jams on the 29th. On the 30th, a fan fantasy animals set that people have been putting together for years. Like, what Phish songs have animals? The answer is dozens. And which ones would you put into a show and put them together? And that 30th show also featured the name within a harpua, Holy Blankenstein, and a narration about numerology, and then performed this on the 31st, only what I could describe as unbelievably complex themed Halloween show. But I got to tell you, from an outsider's perspective, it was really hard to make sense of what was going on in Las Vegas over these 4 nights. Were these shows good? Were they not? Even after listening to them, I couldn't tell. I mean, what was going on in Las Vegas? Each night, was it something silly? Like, did the previous 3 nights build toward the 4th? Was it just random spitting out private jokes that the band thought was funny backstage? Was it going to add up to anything? To put it in your terms, where you like to title things after Phish shows, what is the central theme to this everlasting spoof?
Amen. You nailed it. It was a weird time to be a fan and to be a human. It was right after I had just sold this company that I had been running for 5 years prior. And I had never actually gotten to go on a Phish tour myself, right? Like I missed it in college, and then I started working. And so just, by the time I was able to do Phish tour, I wasn't actually able to do Phish tour. And so I was going to the majority of the tour. I skipped didn't go up to Portland, didn't go down to San Diego, but for the most part, I did a lot of the, Sacramento, San Francisco, LA, Vegas. I did Santa Barbara. Like, I did a good run. And I think that's important context because there were not a lot of people who were going on tour at that time because of what was going on in the world. And so I felt like I had a really unique kind of view of that particular tour. And the one thing that kept sticking out to me was that something was different and they were trying to signal something. And so I don't know if you remember, but they were handing out these flyers in the parking lots during the fall tour. Someone was handing out flyers of the Phish from 1983. You could dig it up. There were photos of them, and it was a rumor. I never saw one, so I can't, independently verify it. But there was a sense that they were going to kind of nod to the fact that, they were coming up on 40 years, and there's, they're playing with time a little bit here. When we went to Sacramento, they busted out a song from the White Tape that they had never played before on their tour opener. You're going to have to fact check me on the name of that one and all the kind of relevant details with it. But, I was there with Chase, our mutual friend Chase, who has been a fan much longer than I have. And I believe still goes by the nickname The Wiz because he knows far more about Phish than almost anyone I know. And, he knew right away what that song was. And he looked at me and he was like, they've never played this before. This is quite literally the biggest bust out that this band has ever done, because they've not ever played it since they became a band. That was night one for us. And then there was the LA Woman in LA that felt momentous. And there were just these like little nuggets kind of sprinkled throughout that tour that had us buzzing going into Vegas. And so then when we got to Vegas and they do the number line set, I kind of, as soon as they went kind of backwards down that number line, they start with 2001 and they go to 1999. I looked at my buddy Chase and I said, they're going backwards in time. This is a time machine bit that they're doing. They're going 2001, 99. Obviously, they were just going backwards down the number line and not necessarily moving backwards in time. I think a lot of the times we assume the band is just going up there and noodling it out and it's random and they make up the set list on the fly. The night one in Vegas was a signal to me that they had been planning something all along. And they had been thinking about it. And they had been this was their first kind of, besides the summer tour, this was their first big planned tour since the pandemic. And it felt to me like he was getting ready to dismount, kind of like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, lift off. That's what the number line show felt like to me. And then, having the Animal set kind of follow it up, I think also kind of solidified this idea that there is thoughtfulness going into this, that the thing that happened before feeds into the thing that happens after. That harpua, if you listen back to it, really does feed into a lot of, what would happen the next night with SciFi Soldier, and even down the line further when they get into the Ninth Cube on that New Year's. If the band would ever confirm this, even if it were true, but it felt almost like a bit of a thesis that was being completed on Trey's part. And the Carinis that were coming out at that time felt like some of the most fiery Carinis that had been played. And so, it might have been the acid talking, I don't know. But in my own experience, I kind of felt like this band had something that they needed to kind of get off their chest coming out of the pandemic. And this entire run we're talking about in the SciFi Soldier show especially was the first act in the band kind of setting up what it is that they had been kind of cooking up in the year and a half that they couldn't do anything.
I agree with you with that entire feeling, that sense that they had something to get off their chest. It seemed like they had a lot of weight to shed, musically speaking. They had a lot to get out there. And we're going to go over the music in just a little bit. I just want to put in a quick note to the reaction that this set got outside of Las Vegas for the people who were not in attendance. But I remember the reaction to this set reminded me, you brought this show up earlier, reminded me a lot of the Wingsuit set. It was a whole new set of music that divided fans right down the middle. And re-listening to this set today, this is an hour and 40-minute set. This is not a quick, like hour and 10 usual. You feel that extra half hour. This was something to say. And it was either, depending on who you talk to, either it was boring, lazy, repetitive white boy funk, or it was an unbelievably creative set of new music that would produce more material for years to come. When I saw the cell phone videos of the opening of the SciFi Soldier set, and that's the only set we're going to talk about today from this show, Shakespeare came to my head, the monologue from Macbeth, where it says, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And to me, that's Phish in a nutshell. Like, they put on so much. You mentioned the Gamehenge set. They put so much effort, so much money. It can't be underestimated. Like, these effects, the band was in costumes and laser lights, and they had different gear on. And going back to Castle Vax, like, that's not cheap, any of that. But in the end, it's just fun music at the same time. It's simultaneously meaningful and meaningless. And I think that's where this podcast exists, right in that space. So I have to ask you, you already told us who you were in the fall of 2021 that led you to this show. But of all the shows you've been to, why do you have attendance bias toward this specific performance?
It was that culmination of having been through what felt like a full tour. It was really, 2 solid weeks, probably 10 shows in 2 weeks or something like that, maybe more. I kind of lost count, but this was kind of that apex point of this is what we were building to. And the delivery for me, I mean, it was disappointing, right? Like, I mean, we thought, the rumors were swirling like they do every year that, they'll do a Rush album because, Neil Peart had just died, or they played the Doors in LA a couple nights prior. So maybe they'll do the Doors finally or something, like there were a lot of things that if I were making a list of what I wanted to see, that's what I would have, it would not have been SciFi Soldier.
Well, in 2020, in 2013, it was going to be Eat a Peach because a lot of people were saying Page is leaning more on the not the Wurlitzer, on the organ, on the Leslie speaker, on the organ. So it sounds like Eat a Peach. They're going to play the Allman Brothers, bro. And they didn't.
Full misdirection, which, is part of the joy of it, right? Like and if you go back and listen to that Harpua, Trey says as much. It really is one of the first times, I think, Trey really uses Harpua as a way to directly address the fans and fuck with them, to the point where he even says, "This is how we're fucking with you this year." Like, that's a direct quote that he knew that they were dropping all of these hints, but you were never going to guess what they were actually going to do with it. Now, as far as like where I was at that point, we had not started production on the podcast yet, but I was really thinking a lot about it, just in terms of like wanting to do it and getting it produced. And so I was like in a real Phish headspace at the time. And the show is so powerful that I actually went and wrote close to 20 pages of almost like, here's what I think they're trying to say and communicate through all of this. Now, granted, it is that nothingness, right? Like, the core of all of this is that, clear your mind, just shut up and listen. Don't ascribe too much, meaning to what's happening here. But it's impossible to do when you know how much meaning and how much thought went into what they were doing. And so, it is that dichotomy between, I want to overanalyze every piece of this, but I also want to appreciate it for the etherealness that it is. And so I tried to analyze it, and I've probably listened to this set more than any other set I've ever listened to, because I think, and if you listen to the album version that's on Spotify, which they also released pretty quickly after, there's almost a studio recorded album version that you can listen to of this, set or album or whatever you want to call it. It's not the same as what they played live. It's shorter, it's tighter, it's not as expansive. There aren't as many references, I think. I think one of the things I kind of started picking up on listening to the set live, but like, I'm not a musicologist. I'm not someone who really studies this kind of stuff professionally in any way, shape, or form. But I was hearing what sounded like references to previous things that had happened in the Phish universe.
Oh, absolutely.
Put it in a tumbler and give it a good hard shake, right? Like, there's Unfortunate Platform comes up in Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue, right? Like, Trey being stuck on the platform. There's a line in one of the songs that kind of sounds a little bit like Wombat, choke on the juice, suck on the rinds, clear your mind. I think I started hearing things that maybe weren't there. It felt so intentional up into that point that I couldn't ascribe to the idea that this was all just more random music that they were producing, that this was somehow a kind of almost Enigma coded. I don't know if you're familiar with Edward Elgar and the Enigma variations.
I'm not.
Elgar was a composer in early 20th century, most known for Pomp and Circumstance.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
I do work in a school. I know Pomp and Circumstance. Yeah.
Pomp. Edward Elgar's Finest March. He wrote a bunch of other things too, my favorite of which was a thing called the Enigma Variations. And what he did was he wrote a series of movements as a, symphonic orchestra thing, each one based on a theme that he never revealed. So there was one cohesive theme that was a secret that each song was modulated off of. And each song was kind of a representation of a friend or a lover or a person in his life. So the entire movement, the entire, piece was a coded message of sorts. They call it the Enigma Variations. And to this day, no musicologist has been able to actually crack Elgar's enigma. No one knows what the original theme was that he was riffing off of when he wrote that piece. And to me, it kind of felt like perhaps Trey, in all the time that he had through the pandemic and all the reflection, there was an effort or a shot that he had to kind of compose a set of music that referenced the past and the future, because obviously this thing takes place in 46 whatever 80. I think that was the way I heard it was, this was Trey truly completing a thesis, right? If the thesis is what you do when you finish college, the magnum opus is what you write when you're at the peak of your career. And to me, it felt like he was starting the movement of the magnum opus. It wasn't the magnum opus. It, to me, felt like the codex for everything that we've gotten since then.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor, if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode. Well, let's dig into the music. The first track, on the live version at least, on the re-listen app, is the SciFi Soldier intro, which is a bunch of static noises, sounds of wind, and then through the static crackle, you hear the band members recite lines, including, "I hope these people are ready to get more down. It's time to save the planet." It reminded me of the opening of Quadrophenia, which is a track called "I Am the Sea." And Pete Townsend had 4 main themes going throughout Quadrophenia, musical themes, and over the noise of waves breaking and wind and rain, you hear the band just kind of say one line at a time, not part of a greater musical piece, almost like an overture. And then there's the sound of these like 80s style synthesizers as the band is being, and I put this in quotes, transported by different colored Star Trek style beams that also happen to be the colors of the clones from the previous New Year's Eve show. Not a coincidence. So what was happening visually before any music started, James?
Yeah, I mean, you just described it really well. I think, the other thing that stuck out to me in the visual realm that signaled other things was they had the shapes behind the band that were also color-coded to the clones. One of the platform and the color, I believe it was the green one that was above Trey, actually stopped working halfway through the set, and so it just kind of removed itself to the ceiling. And so that felt like a reference to something visually. I believe the second song in the set is when they introduced kind of the dance break, which, I had been at Castbot Box, and that to me felt a lot like the opening to Turtle in the Clouds in terms, and I actually, found out through friends of friends that it was the same choreographer that had helped with the Turtle in the Clouds dance, also helped with the SciFi Soldier dance that they did. So to me, it almost felt like an acid flashback in both literal and figurative terms, but it was striking because here in my head, I was thinking backwards in time, right? I'm thinking 2001, 1999, we're going to 1983. This is what's happening. They're going to do something from the 80s. It's going to be fucking gritty and tight and just like back to the beginning almost, which, the band just talking separately, not really a part of one another. That was what Phish was at the beginning. They were not a band before they were. In my head, I really was expecting something very different when it happened. And so to have the Star Trek beams and the fucking goofy ass costumes come out, there was a sense of almost disappointment that they were doing something so bizarre and so weird. And it really wasn't until I started hearing and seeing all of these little tiny references to things that I had seen before that I had felt like they are going forward in time. They are going backwards in time. This is a band that transcends time in order to get you into the moment that you are currently in, the now, where truly nothing else matters. And that was kind of what was, watching those visuals, that's what I was going through.
Well, the first song that they play, the first song proper, I guess I can say, is Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue, which has a tentative funk beat. But what caught my attention were very loud, I put loud in all caps, loud synthesizer effects. And I know this is not by far the first time Phish has used synthesizers, or Page specifically, but they really lean on that in this album, in this whole set. And then there's even a cool vocoder effect. You mentioned that it's kind of 80s. That's like one style of music that Phish hasn't kind of made their own. And it seems like this was the opportunity to do it. And I remember thinking at the time, the first time that I heard Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue was, oh, Phish could take this places. This could go places. And it really did this first time around 7 minutes. And this definitely sounds, to your point earlier, practiced, rehearsed, and patient, even if it was a little tentative, like most Halloween sets do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue, you've been to plenty of shows with Phish, or with Chase, obviously, our mutual friend. And he famously will always call Punch You in the Eye as his opener. And so I don't know if you remember, but the set list leaked that day. They put out the comic kind of early. It had leaked.
Yeah.
And so we knew that they were going to play. We knew they were opening with Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue. And when I heard Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue, the first thing I thought was, oh, that's Punch You in the Eye, obviously. Punch, knuckle, like that. They wouldn't allow this set list to get out. I mean, I was here for Casbot Vox. We didn't know anything about that until we got there and it all started. This seemed almost more teasing us, like, oh yeah, we're going to tell you exactly what we're going to play for Halloween, and you're still not going to understand what it is we're actually serving you.
Mission accomplished for me.
Correct.
Next up was Get More Down, which was strange. I loved it. My brain, because Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue is such a straightforward plotting kind of beat, and then Get More Down has this weird time signature shift opening, which as a drummer I love.
it goes.
I don't know if it was the levels on the audience recording I heard. Paige sounded very, very loud, but this song got so deep and so into it. It speeds up around 7 minutes, and they use the phrase bending time itself.
That's what we're talking about.
Shocked. Yeah, I should
This
not
is
be
what we're
shocked.
talking about. I'm not making this shit up.
And it's
Maybe
becoming a recurring theme since 2015, I would suggest, right? Since the or even 2013, I would say, since the 30th anniversary show, they time traveled effectively, right? Back to 1983 to Nectar's. And then in 2015, 2 years later, they had the Hourglass set. In 3.0, I guess the latter half of 3.0, time has become the central theme of Phish. The playing of it is Get More Down. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because this song is really well put together, that when it was released on Spotify, it was released as an album, Get More Down, by the band SciFi Soldier, not SciFi Soldier as the album.
Yeah, I mean, that I also think that this is another little fan conspiracy theory that I've been cooking up. But if I say name one of the least regarded Phish songs, just in terms of like what the fan base typically groans at, like name two that you could think of. Farmhouse is just, widely considered just okay, Farmhouse. Numberline is another song, right? Night One was the Numberline set. And so, after the Numberline set, Numberline was a fucking sick song to hear at the end of that. That was a perfect, you've capped this set in such a beautiful way that you've taken a song that this fan base does not appreciate and you've forced us to appreciate it. When I heard Get More Down, the first thing I thought to myself was, at some point, they are going to do this with the song More, where they're going to hit us in the face with it in a way that makes us love it, even though we have all talked about how many times we've gone to the bathroom during it.
Yeah, and they've done that. They have a way of doing that. They did that with Ruby Waves in 2019 at Alpine Valley.
They almost take it as a challenge, it seems like, when there's a song that the fan base can't really get their head into, that they're like, oh, you think Petrichor is a little too wishy-washy? Here's a New Year's all around it that, like, still is one of my favorite videos to watch. I know it's not everyone's favorite songs, but, like, that performance is stunning to look at, and you cannot not appreciate what that was, even if you don't like hearing that song eating up 15 minutes of, your first set or whatever.
Sure. And of all the songs, every Halloween set has like 2 or 3 maybe songs that stick around as regulars in the set list. The next one is one of those, Egg in a Hole. This is a lot of noise and power chords to start. And I don't know if this is sacrilege, if not to you, maybe to the listeners at home. This set was not unlike a Kiss concert.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very loud. It was very powerful, a lot of power chords. Pyrotechnics, outfits, the music, forgive me, Phish, was much more straightforward than usual, than you would expect. You came to the band as a prog rock fan. There wasn't a lot of prog rock to slurp up in this set. And then about 6 months later, at the rescheduled MSG April run that came up earlier between us, it was found right in the middle of a really dark, simple jam on April 23rd. Egg in a Hole, it has people clamoring for it now.
I've tried to decode what the egg in the hole is.
It's just breakfast.
It's delicious. We used to call it One-Eyed Jack growing up on Long Island. It's a dark, heavy song, which I feel like is it's nice to hear Phish exploring those dark notes again. And those heavier kind of themes. I mean, I was in Mexico this year, but a friend was, and I obviously listened to him, and it was a lot of those jams got darker than I had heard in a long time. From what I understand, I listen to PhishRadio religiously, so I've heard some of this, but a lot of the early Phish stuff really was okay exploring some of those kind of dark corners of sound. And, to me, this kind of felt like a chance to kind of really play with that. And it also kind of reminded me of the song Death Don't Hurt Very Long.
Yes, I agree.
Just kind of melodically and rhythmically, it kind of has that same like plodding, sense of impending doom in it,
And the
so
repetitiveness of the lyrics.
that's what I kind of drew the immediate line to when I heard it live for the first time. And I also love how they jam it out. I mean, it comes up in the most kind of unexpected, and it doesn't always sound like I can't actually think of a time where they just start playing Egg in a Hole the way Egg in a Hole plays when they play it this time. It really is kind of, they segue into it beautifully, and then you realize you're inside of an egg in a hole. But that's a very different thing than, a song that goes into regular rotation.
Up next is what I found to be some fans' favorite song from this album to quote, but it has not been played since, to date at least. That's Thanksgiving, which is another slow, funky drum beat with the phrase, "It's a shame about the blood," being repeated over and over again. And this is where your conspiracy theories, at least to me, came to the forefront of my mind while I was listening, because this is where there were plenty of Phish lyrics and references just being thrown around, almost to the point, like you might imagine that you heard some. The ones that I counted within the first couple of minutes were "The day that you arrived, my sleeping monkey was revived." There was a quick cheer from the crowd. "Holidays in the Everglades" came up. Santos, I forget what it stands for, but whatever that the full phrase of Santos, and referencing their own music is part of the comic book, that it was toward their current reconciling with their 40-year history.
Yes.
Like, we've owned this stuff for so long, now we can just play with it. They're all just toys to us.
I love that assessment. That was the song that I looked at Chase and I was like, they're still fucking with us. There's hidden meaning in all of this that I don't think any one person here can actually unwind. And actually, this got me into, kind of call it the unified theory of James Dell's Phish universe. But the references in there, I knew some of them, but I didn't know all of them, because some of them truly predated me in terms of, when I came to be in this fandom. But because Chase had been there for so long, he was able to kind of, Everglades, like that was New Year's 2000, whatever, right? Like, the takeaway from that was kind of this idea that, like, if we are in fact moving into 4.0, which Trey had kind of alluded to on his Instagram just before all of this started, 4.0 is not so much about, are you 1.0 or 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever. It really is that bond between someone who is 1.0 and knows that history and knows what has happened before, and someone who is a later fan who maybe is just hearing this for the first time, but finding it special and finding and hearing their own special, signifiers in it. That, like, those two things need, if you're a 1.0 fan, but you never listened to Casbot Box, you wouldn't have gotten all the references that they were making, right? And so it's like you needed someone like me who was at all those, kind of later Halloween shows, standing next to someone like Chase, who was there in the 90s, in order to make sense of what was happening. And that, to me, was like, that was a real profound beauty that I had not expected or experienced.
Which is also true for the New Year's 2022-2023 gag, where they had references from all of their past New Year's Eve gags and then some. It would take, you would have to use a freeze frame and a pinpoint, a laser pointer, to be able to get them all down.
And I actually, my real conspiracy is that they meant to do that New Year's 2022.
All right, when it was canceled. Right.
I think they had a real whole schedule plan that they were going to dismount from, handstands in grand fashion, if you will. And I think the pandemic really, I heard a rumor online, I don't know if it's true, but I heard that the band had a vote to see if they would do the New Year's show. And there was one person in the band who voted to do it, and the other three said no. And it was Trey. Trey really wanted that show to go ahead. And I think it was because this all kind of fit together in ways that, ultimately he made work because he had to. But, there was also talk of a wedge theme, which is kind of what they went with in Mexico the following year when they finally were able to kind of go back and do things. They had those pyramids kind of built into the sand. Trey gives a speech, not a speech. He gave an interview on PhishRadio at one point where he had talked about wanting to build a big pyramid in Madison Square Garden at some point as a, potential gag. And so, I kind of thought what happened on Halloween was going to Halloween that year, 2021, felt like an incomplete thought to me that would have been completed at that New Year's had they not been forced to kind of move into the pandemic ninth cube.
My favorite song of this whole set, if it were a standard Phish show, I should say, using our traditional barometers, was Clear Your Mind, the next song. It starts off as more of the same, like 3 chord refrains over a pretty suave groove. And again, references all over the place, not necessarily about Phish, but just about pop culture in general, of each band member naming a person who all has the same first name. So Ralph Lauren and Ralph Macchio. Then there were Oscars. I didn't love it yet, but it turns to soft ambient Phish at around 6 minutes. Which is reminiscent of what I like to call planetarium Phish. And they played a lot of it in 2010 and 2013, some segments in 1999. And that's where my mind changed for Clear Your Mind. I really enjoyed it. And then they go over to Holy Blankenstein starts to come in with some aggressive Trey rhythm guitar. It all pulls together by the end, by 10 minutes, and then it falls apart. I don't know if they never found an ending for this song or they just said, this is it. And they were done with it. But there's a lot going on in Clear Your Mind.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I agree with you that it is the song that I still go back to a lot. And I quote Clear Your Mind, almost daily sometimes in terms of, wanting to meditate and being able to actually clear my mind to a certain degree. And there's a lot of that in here, right? Like, listen. And this idea that like the whole purpose of why we go to these shows is to feel that collective effervescence, that catharsis, that sense of, release that one can find if you train yourself to not see your thoughts as your own and really, release them. That seems to be an underwriting theme to a lot of what Trey stands for in his kind of personal, beliefs and his personal kind of, how he handles his own life. And that to me just felt like this is thoughtful. He's trying to communicate something to us in a way that, we can, I think it's the unwinding, right? If you listen in the darkness, there's this repeated theme in these songs of stop thinking about it. Just enjoy it. Listen, Clear your mind. When I bring someone to their first Phish show, which I love doing, first thing I do is I tell them, know that if you love a song, love it while you can, because it's going to be a different song soon. And if you hate a song, don't worry, it's going to be a different song soon. And just be in the moment and try to clear your mind. And that to me is the recipe for enjoying your first Phish show. If you go in with preconceived notions, you will be disappointed.
And like meditation, it's something that even a longtime fan like you or I, we could still use that advice, going without expectations. It's a rookie mistake that I make almost every time.
I'm sure Trey would say the same thing, right? Yeah. Like it is clearing your mind is an active practice, not a passive practice. And I think, Trey being able to verbalize that so, directly, but also so obtusely, I think is, it's why I think this is one of the best sets I've ever had the pleasure of seeing.
Next up is the Ninth Cube, another reference to their past, obviously a very overt one. This is a song that might be the most straightforward one of this whole set. That it's straight melody, standard beat, with another reference to their past. It's mellow but tight. It's just it goes a little downward. I got to remember why I wrote this. I wrote turns a little downward at 4 minutes and 30 seconds before it ends, and then again after Clear Your Mind, I wrote again. This may be my favorite song yet. It just that note comes up, yeah, over and over, and then we get to the Inner Reaches of Outer, which of all the songs that came across and that we're referencing and cross-referencing with Phish's past and future, this musically reminded me of Yamar of all songs, which I know is not a Phish original, but it is a breezy song. This song didn't sound as tight or as polished or practiced as the others, but I love the idea of the voice synthesizers surrounding Page's vocals. Like the lyrics didn't grab me for any straightforward purpose. It's a little half-baked, this song, but the theatrics and the theme are well beyond Casvat Voxed, and I just kind of surrendered to it. If Clear Your Mind is the new surrender to the flow, that's what I did here.
And I think that's exactly what it was, right? Like it each of these songs do feed into each other in a way that I think is, maybe overlooked in a casual listening. But if you can get to the place where you're feeling, if you could get to the clear your mind state, then all of a sudden a song like that breeziness hits so much better. And that's kind of what it felt like in that room, right? Like it was almost a break in the, seriousness of the confusion and the darkness and the what are we experiencing. This was light. This was easy breezy, as you put it. It was also loose. I still haven't pieced all of it together, right? Like, if it is truly an Enigma variation, then I'm not sitting here saying that I solved the fucking puzzle here. But if you listen closely, it does feel like the band kind of starts falling apart towards the end of these songs. And I think that's even more apparent in a song like The Unwinding, which I think felt to me, the song I thought of when I heard that was at Coventry when they play Waiting in the Velvet Sea.
Yes.
And we've all seen that video. We've all cried to that video with Page. And if you haven't seen it, go fucking watch it. But it starts slow. The band is a little out of tempo with one another. It feels like the thing that was so tight in the beginning is now kind of coming apart at the seams in a way, which also feels somewhat self-reflective for the band to acknowledge that did happen to them and that they did fall apart and unwind. This felt like the start of that, where they are having fun, but it is not as tight. They are not as thoughtful. It doesn't really close the way that the other songs that are so well rehearsed, so tight, so fucking note for note and complex that, yeah, it's fun, it's loose, it's whatever. It's not as tight. They are not as cohesive as a unit as when, they are in the beginning or as when they are in the end of this.
I agree with you. That's a really good interpretation. I think it's a very observant interpretation when you take the long view. The next song, Don't Doubt Me, I read it now completely differently. Talking to you has completely changed my perspective on this set from beginning to end, because I think this song especially was a lightning rod for the main criticism of this set, which is repetitive lyrics, simple melody or progression. The lyrics seem to be pulled from thin air just over and over for about 3 minutes and 45 seconds. It's fun in the moment, but then it disappears. I hear what you're saying, because earlier with the inner reachers of outer, this is where it kind of tips a little bit. And
Well,
if they're not running out of gas, they're at least cruising for a little bit.
Yeah, and there's an egoism in there that I think Trey would acknowledge now that, he's done his best to kind of, set aside and, release his ego. But, don't doubt me is a pretty fucking strong statement to make to someone. Just trust me. I know what I'm doing. I'm fine out here. He does handstands in grand fashion, but he's a genuine asshole. That idea, that hubris that comes with "don't doubt me." I mean, he's challenging the audience at that point, that he knows what he's doing, and I think that ultimately was also a contributing factor to the band kind of unwinding at the time that they did.
Sure.
They were cruising, and it sounded fine, but it was not cohesive anymore.
Oh, yeah, by a long shot. At the end of Don't Doubt Me, there was more references to Holy Blankenstein, and I was wondering if this is just the ultimate inside joke within the inside joke. Like, is this the ultimate attendance bias show? Like, could it possibly be appreciated if you weren't there? And it leads into the song that you've referenced a few times already, The Unwinding. And my first thought was, gotta have a Trey ballad in there somewhere. And this is where, if we're kind of looking at this whole set as a timeline of Phish, or kind of a look back, a career-ending slideshow, so to speak, like at a retirement dinner, this might be the beginning of the 3.0 era, where Trey is much more in tune with his feelings. He's getting more comfortable expressing them in song. And it's a slow, soft progression with the band singing The Unwinding over and over again. It's very sweet. This is, again, I wrote one of my favorite songs so far.
It's easy to fall into them that way, and I think it's melancholy is what it is.
Yeah,
it feels truly retrospective in a way that I think it made me sad. I was sad when I heard that song in the venue. I remember I haven't said it out loud anywhere, and I'm not going to say it here, but it did make me think about, a time in the future when they have unwound, especially given how much I was thinking about the past leading into that and leading into all the other shows and time and all of those things, especially also seeing, Trey's cube at this point has now been risen to the rafters and is now fully blacked out. And so there are only 3 cubes over the stage. And so, it felt like the cohesion that had started this set so strong and started this whole tour. This whole tour was a series of well-rehearsed things that had happened. This felt like the removal of that from me. And it made me sad. It bummed me out.
Sure. Sure. That makes a ton of sense thinking, looking into the unknown while you're still in the moment, thinking about
Yep.
what the future holds and having no idea, really. The next song is Something Lives Here, which is a New Orleans style second line drum beat with a really nice keyboard solo. But about 5 minutes in is where it grabbed my attention, where Page especially switches over to kind of a 1999 by Prince style keyboard progression. This is where those synthesizer and crazy keyboard effects that we heard at the very, very beginning come home to roost. And this was a really enjoyable song, although I don't know if it's the recording I listened to, it sounded like the room was a little tired, but then they were brought right back with the howling, which is, in my opinion, the energetic peak of the set.
The howling was great, and I have my theories on the howling too. Which at the time I didn't. You don't know the names of the song. They were in the playbill, but I wasn't tracking the set so closely that I even knew where we were at the time. When Phish is not unknown for songs that are titled one thing but actually mean another, right? So Olivia's Pool, Oblivious Fool,
Right.
right? Like
The moment
they're
dance, the moment ends.
there that exists within the Phish kind of language of like the hidden word in the hidden song. I heard the highway. And when I hear Trey repeating the highway over and over again, I mean, I've seen him at SPAC enough times, both solo and with the band, that like I know what a momentous moment that was, getting pulled over for him. I mean, it saved his life getting arrested and going to drug court when he did. And so when I heard him saying what I thought was the highway over and over again, that's what I thought that was a reference to. And coming out of a song that was really sad, that it felt like the band was unwinding, that really felt to me like oh shit, like this really does feel autobiographical in the most coded of ways, that unless you really were like paying attention all these years, you're not going to hear the highway, you'll hear the howling. That's not what I heard when I first listened to it.
Well, a lot of the crowd heard it because they were howling along, which adds to a lot of the fun of it. I think it gets a little repetitive after a while, but I'm just a curmudgeon.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. And like, it's not one that I'm excited to hear come out of the woodwork, these days, but people do like to howl.
Apparently.
I'm anti-wooing personally. So, I look at howls are not as bad as woos in my opinion, but I think it was at the last Garden Run, the howling came around and the crowd was wooing their fucking asses off. And so if everyone's having a good time, we'll be curmudgeons in the back just talking shit.
I'll sign on to that, and we probably will be.
Amen.
But after after the howling, though, we're already at the end of the set with I Am in Miami, which I love. I love acoustic or bluegrass inspired Phish. This song, of all songs, reminded me of I've Been Around in a weird way. Talk about a deep cut, which they don't play that often. It was just kind of a repetitive, funny wordplay with kind of like circular lyrics like that. What is it, Ouroboros, where the snake eating its own tail? It kind of starts where it ends. And I really liked I Am in Miami. It's a silly, goofy song. That was a really nice nightcap to the set before the inversion of the intro is the SciFi Soldier outro, where the beams come back down and they get sucked back up into the space of 4680.
I love that assessment of it. I felt the same way at the time. It was, it's always hard when they close with what, felt like a really a cappella song after a really fire set of, like you said, almost an hour and a half. And so
more than that, it was an hour and 40 minutes.
Hour 40, right? So it was a long set. We were all tired, and I think we were kind of expecting a banger to close it out. And so to get something kind of subdued, and again, it created a sense of melancholy in the room, at least for me, seeing those kinds of songs kind of back to back to back to back. It was beautiful. It was them doing what they do best in the most simple way, which is making, four voices coming together to make something beautiful. And, I think Mike had said it on his Instagram just after the show. They had never really done anything. So he believed they had never done a show that was so collaborative before. Yeah, he was like, it sounded like they all kind of chipped in on the writing together. It was them at their shiniest, trying to collaborate with one another. And I think, Miami was a really good, capstone to that concept, because it was just them and it was just their voices and, the most simplest instrumentation. The album version's great. If you haven't listened to it, it's a little bit more kind of developed as a song. It was a beautiful moment. And I think, it was confusing too, though. I think immediately those of us who want to conspire and figure out, it was, what are they trying to say? It was, well, I guess we're doing Miami and New Year, New Year's in Miami, right? Yeah. Like there was another song where they, reference got to get back to Chicago. And so there was some thinking, maybe they'll do a Chicago, right? But I think it was a perfect kind of capstone to what was a very confusing, emotionally wrought set at times that really brought everything back to that core theme of simple music, simple people enjoying just good tune, good melody, just loving each other. That to me is what it's about.
Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about creative people, being creative, all of your theories, going down all the rabbit holes and coming back out to go on to the next rabbit hole. It was a true pleasure really digging deep with you, because most of the time we're talking about Phish, we're at a show and we shouldn't be talking that much. So it was a real pleasure and enlightening to, first of all, give me a revisionist way to think back on this set the next time I listen to it, but hear about coming at it from such a nostalgic but creative and optimistic way as you did. So thank you so much for taking the time.
It was my pleasure chatting with you. I look forward to doing it, hopefully at Mohegan this summer, or you're not doing the festival?
I'm doing the festival.
Oh, yeah. I'll see you on the field then, buddy. Yep. I can't wait to talk to you more about all of this stuff. And I appreciate this podcast, man. You are doing a service for fans everywhere, and I appreciate you for it.
And that's it for today's conversation with James Dell about the SciFi Soldier set. And we went all over the place, sidetracked every 2 seconds, so it's definitely time for an attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
To make sure that she gets full credit by name, James's co-host of We've Got a Band was Gabby Bluestone. The movie, based on hiker Aaron Ralston's harrowing experience of self-amputation, is 127 hours. It was released in 2010, starring James Franco, and it earned 6 Academy Award nominations, although it didn't win any. It was nominated for Best Picture, Franco was nominated for Best Actor, Danny Boyle was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, as well as nominations for Editing, Best Film Score, and Best Song. The David Bowie Halloween show that James credits with him getting it was in 2016 when the band covered the legendary album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. The song that was busted out in Sacramento was And So to Bed, which James correctly cites as being the song's debut from the White Tape. According to Phish.net, that's 1,886 shows. I knew that Santos in Say It To Me Santos was an acronym for something, but I couldn't capture it in the moment. According to Phish.net, Santos stands for Subterranean Arctic Neurotechnology Orientation Station. And that's it for today's fact check and today's episode. I'd like to thank James Dell for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything it does for children's music education, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You can also go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can to help with production. Also, you can follow Attendance Bias on social media, mostly on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.